Okay, so how did it go um, with the homework?
Yeah, I was up to like I did whatever you did.
I'm sorry, can you say again?
I was up to you like I was able to come up to you, like cope up with you.
Ah, okay, excellent. So any questions about what we've done so far? Okay. All right, so let's see. Let me close some of these windows here. Okay. So today we should probably talk about no, actually what I wanted was this. Right, we should talk about forms. And so forms are essentially they are a way for users to input data into the application. So for example, with our admin interface, we can edit all of the rows for any of the tables in the database, but maybe we want to allow users to also make some changes. Like for example, we can allow each of the drivers to change their own driver information page. So forms are one way to allow that to happen. So we're going to go through the tutorial, and as usual, we're going to adapt the techniques that we see in the tutorial to our own application, our race application. So here we have a form that's used for the poll detail template. And where we want to use this is here in the driver page. So we want to take this form. And so we'll start out by just putting the form down here below the information that we already have. We have here the driver. So all of our what our detail page usually shows is the name and nickname of the driver and the car they drive and the car's top speed. So I think the easiest thing would be to start by allowing the form to edit the name and nickname of the driver. Okay, so here we want to start by specifying the URL that we want to go to. Now we don't yet have a URL for this because we haven't, I mean, we're implementing new functionality here. But what we're probably going to call this is we're going to start with the application, and then we're going to use colon, and we want to say what view this should go to. And we probably want to bring this back into the driver detail view. I think that's what we called it. Yeah, there it is. So every time you go to this page, you see the form that allows you to edit the driver. And then once you submit this form, once you take an action on this form, you get back to that same page. It's just with updated information. Okay, and here in the previous, in the other application, they were using the question ID as a parameter. What we have is the driver ID. Okay, and the method for a form is usually going to be post. So quick description of HTML and what methods mean. HTML is HTML is the language for the protocol called HTTP, or in this case, it's HTTPS because it's the secure version of the protocol, but it uses the same principles. So whenever you make a request to a server, that request is done, it's a request for a resource, and this is the URL of that resource. It's this page that we're looking at. So it's a request for a resource using a certain method. Those are the two components of the request, are the URL, and in this case, here's the URL. We will build the URL for this form using this syntax. And then this is the, so this specifies the resource for the request, and this other parameter specifies the method. When you look at a website, usually, most of the time, you will be using get methods. And if you want to see that for this page, right-click on the page and go to Inspect. This will bring up the developer tools for this page. So this is a set of features that are used usually by developers and very suitable for what we're doing right now. So one of the things that you can see here, there are a lot of details, but we're only going to look at a couple of them. One of them is this Elements tab, which shows you the source for the web page. And along with the source, it lets you expand and collapse each of the components on the page. So for example, here you have this header over here. And so I can collapse the element if I just want to hide it, because the source for the whole page is probably pretty big. And then if I want to expand the element, that gives me the chance to see the exact HTML code that shows up in that element. So this is one of the features of the developer toolset. The other one is this network tab. And when you go to the network tab, you can refresh the page, and then it will record all of the network interactions that are happening between this browser and the server. But usually those will be the requests that are made from the browser to the server. Sorry about that. So if you look at the very top, this was a request for a document. The document was at tutorial 04, and so this is the specific page that we're looking at. And after that, we see a bunch of other GET requests for other different resources. These over here are a couple of JavaScript files, and you can tell that by seeing the .js at the end of the well, in this case, file name. So yes, this is a file, and the extension for the file is .js. So we see this at the end, we go, okay, that's cool. This is a script, and here we have it specified over here in the type column as well. Here's another file. This is a this is a PNG file. These are fonts. These are some more images, some more scripts, and finally the icon that shows up here at the top, favicon.ico. Okay, so as you can see, all of these are essentially get methods. And I mentioned in one of the previous lessons that whenever you look at a web page, you don't just get the text for the page. You also have other elements like images, or as you can see, JavaScript files. And for each one of these files, the browser that you're using will make a separate request to the server. And this is just how HTTP works. Okay, any questions about this?
And so I have a question.
Yeah.
The URL after the action is when you click on it, it will go to that other page?
That's right. And it will go there using a post method as opposed to a get method.
Okay.
Yeah, and the major difference between the get method and the post method is that with post, you are also sending some data to the server from the browser. And so whenever you're filling out a form on a web page, the way that data goes to the server is because the browser will make a post request. So, okay, so now we want to continue modifying this form to allow us to change the driver's name and nickname. Okay, now let's see here. I don't remember what this does, and I would like to. I see. So this is an issue of security. Basically, there is a way to exploit a website by making a cross-site request forgery. And the way that works is that you have a form on your site, and some other malicious site tries to replicate that form and send it to the server as if it was from your site. So this token is used, the CSRF token is used to protect you from that type of attack. So we'll just leave it there to keep us safe. And now we're going to change the code a bit. And the first thing we want to do is we want to add, as you can see, the form is introduced using this tag called form. And so we actually want to use tags called input to describe each of the fields that we want to edit. Okay, now in the previous form, we had this pattern where we were creating a for loop in order to display all of the different choices that the user has to answer this question. So in our case, we do not have something to loop through. We just have this one element, which is the driver. So I'm going to delete these two lines for now. Maybe we'll come back to that and use a for loop in that way. But for now, we're just going to include a text box. So the type is going to be, actually forget this type. Let's check it out. I'm just going to see what type of input this is here. Hopefully that's going to be, there we go. Search. It's not exactly what I wanted. So input form text box. Okay, so it is text. That's right. Just wanted to confirm that. There's another input called text area, and that's a bit, those are the boxes of text that you can edit. Okay. I'm going to call this name. And the ID will be, again, because we don't have a for loop, we're just going to call this ID name. And the value is going to be driver.name. In the other one, the value was the ID of the choice for that question because it was a multiple choice. And that's as always, the homework is going to be to try to catch up your polls application to where we are as well, to the point that we got to in the tutorial. Of course, the features are going to be different, but just going through the tutorial and getting to this point. Okay. Here we're going to say label for name. And I wonder if this is going to work the same way. Basically, we in the previous version, we had the label was the text for that choice. In this one, we're going to just have a static text that will say change driver's name. And then we're going to add one more input with a corresponding label to change the driver's nickname. And finally, there's one more type of input that we want to look at and include in our form, and that's a submit. And what this will be is a button that sends the form and the values in the form to the URL specified here using a post method. Okay. And we're just going to say edit, or actually easier, save. So save whatever values we've entered for the driver's name and nickname. All right, any questions about this so far?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what does the input do?
Good question. So the input creates this type of element on the web page where you can edit the data.
Okay, and then label, what does label do?
So label is something like this. This is the label. It just displays some text to let you know what this input is used for.
Okay, and what is the name and the ID and value in the input?
So name and ID are actually just internal attributes. And actually, that's a good question. So in HTML, we have these tags. So these look like this. And then within the tags, we have these other elements that we're going to call attributes. Well, that are called attributes. So, and each tag has its own attribute. So for example, an input will have an attribute called type to indicate whether it's a text, a radio box, a drop down, or checkbox, and so on. The name and the ID are common attributes for most of the for most tags. Well, ID is. Name, actually, I'm not sure. But yes, ID is sort of an internal, well, ID for the tag. It tells the rest of the page what the ID of this tag is. And so, speaking of which, I need to give them a different, give these a different value. So yeah, so the attributes let you change details of that particular element. So this, for example, here, and they're used differently. So for example, here, these are very important attributes because they specify what will happen when you click the submit button on this form. But this ID, for example, if it has the wrong ID, like if I typoed this and it's like this, then all that's going to happen is that, well, it's still going to be bad because when I try to retrieve this value in the view, I won't be able to find it. And one thing that's important to know about HTML in general is that because of the way that browsers are designed, browsers are very are meant to be very consumer friendly. So things like this developers tools, this is not something that most users will use in a browser. And so whenever a web page fails, it's usually very hard to know that the page has an error. Because, like, let's say that there's another popular attribute called class, and we'll learn more about that when we get to CSS, which I think is going to be probably next time, or either way next week. So you can assign classes to the different elements of a web page to, well, you can achieve different things with this, but most frequently it's to specify what kind of style the element will use. So I could call this my bold style, for example. And the style would come from a CSS file. And as I said, we'll talk about that more next week. But here's an example on this page. See how, for example, this here is a monospace font, right? All of the characters have the same width, whereas these are not monospace. These are, see, the L has a different width than the rest of the characters. So these different styles are usually specified with classes, and we can check out the source code for this web page. I can right click there and inspect. And as you can see, this is a span element. A span element indicates a portion of text. It's kind of like a paragraph, but it doesn't necessarily start a new paragraph in the text. So for example, here, this span is just that form element. see, when I highlight it down here, it's highlighted up here too. So when I hover my mouse over it, you can see that it's highlighted in the page at the top. And so the class of this span is pre, and pre stands, it comes from pre-formatted. And that's meant to indicate one of these monospaces. They look like code, right? So if you look back at your editor, you will see that more likely than not, the font you're using is monospace, where all the letters have the same width. Okay, so that's sometimes referred to as pre-formatted. And then even this is included in another tag called code, which has its own class, its own classes. You can specify multiple. And these also refer to styles. And you can see the styles here on the right-hand side. The styles mean these styles come from CSS files. And CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. Each one of these is essentially a style sheet. It's a specification of the list of styles that are applied to each element in the web page. And they're called cascading because you can have multiple ways to combine styles. You can either mention which styles are attached to which specific elements. Like, for example, here, if you see the style here on the right, is attached to code elements. So like elements like this. And that's implicit. The code element does not have to specify the class in order to use this style. This is simply applied to all of the code elements on the page. Here's another one that applies to all the all the code elements on the page. But again, because they're cascading, they are applied in the order in which the CSS files are included. And so this was applied first, it looks like, and this was applied afterwards. And the reason I'm guessing this is, well, one, I can look on the right here and I can see that this lists the CSS file from which this piece of code was, or from which the style sheet was included, and it lists the line, or at least that's what it looks like. And this is line 1, and this appears to be line 4 somehow. Anyway, whether it's a line or something else, this is, you know, it's item 1 and this is item 4. Maybe this is not lines, maybe it's the number of style sheets. And this is the first one, this is the fourth one. I would guess, even without looking at documentation or anything like that, just looking at what's presented before me, I try to deduce what this could mean. I'm not an expert with CSS, so and I wanted to mention that to explain that whenever you're faced with some code, it might not necessarily make sense right away. If you spend some time just looking at it, it can you can figure out some things about it. A lot of times programming feels like detective work because it takes like looking at all the evidence that's in front of you and trying to find clues from it. Okay, so back to this. They're called cascading because they're applied in the order in which they're defined, and whenever you apply, so see here, I specify the font family and font size for all the elements of type code. And here I'm specifying the font family and the font size for all elements of type code again, therefore overriding these, and that's represented here by the fact that there's this line through them. And I can use this filter box at the top to identify more of these classes, more of these elements. So I can say docutils. Oops. Okay, so maybe this is not. There we go. So docutils is a class that might be used for something else. It might be used for some scripting on this page. So it doesn't show up in the CSS file. But here is the literal class. And so what this seems to say is for this true. Yes, I think what this says is for this is called the CSS selector, and it specifies which elements will be the ones that this style applies to. So, and again, this is just a preview of what we'll talk about next week, but essentially what this says is find the element or elements that have the ID docs-content. And the convention is that in one of these, this is called a CSS selector, by the way. Whenever we, in one of these selectors, if you use the hashtag, that means that you are about to specify elements by ID. This is just their syntax. There's nothing. There's nothing. No other reason why that's the convention. That's just what they decided. So basically here what this says is find all of the elements with the ID docs content. And so here is the element with the ID docs content. There may be others, but definitely this is one, the one that we're currently in. Because here's the code, and this is docs content. And you can see even in the highlighting above that the form text is within this larger text element. And here we have the div with ID equal docs content, and here we have, where is it? Okay, here we have the CSS selector, which specifies docs content preceded by a hash, which means elements with the ID docs content. Then we have a space, so there's no special character here. What this means is within all the elements with the ID docs content, find all the elements of the type code. So this is no more ID. It's exactly it says all the elements with the tag code, right? So all elements that have this tag code. And again, syntax convention is if there's no special element preceding the identifier, then that means find the element with the tag code. If what precedes the identifier is a hashtag, then it says find the element with the ID docs content, right? And then finally, there's another special character in CSS selectors, and that's this dot, which means class. And so this says the class literal. And the way these should be read is from right to left, meaning find within the elements that have the ID docs content, find the elements that have the tag code with the class dot literal. And yeah, that's complicated at first sight, but it's really just a way to select which of the elements the style gets applied to. That was just a brief kind of introduction to explain the attribute class. So any questions about that? Okay, cool. So basically back here, what we're doing is, here's the ID, and again, ID is kind of an internal thing. And finally, the attribute value, which in the case of this type of input called text, will be the a text box that has the value, which is the driver's name. Now, all of the inputs that have a value, we will be able to receive those values in the method that will handle this post. And so you remember that we are able to go to driver detail by just going to race / and then the ID of the driver. So using this form, we will also go to driver detail and use the ID of the driver. But instead of doing a GET request, we will be doing a POST request. And if it's a POST request, then we will be able to receive some values, which are these inputs that have values. Okay.
I have one more question.
Yes, please.
So the value equal to save in the end, is the save some internal values?
No, this could be anything. This is just the label that will show up on the button.
Oh.
So I could say save driver stuff or save driver, and that's what will show up on the button. Like here, the value is just submit.
Oh, so the last input is different from the previous two inputs.
Yes, this input creates the button to submit the form.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, so now we want to go back to this driver detail view, and we want to edit it a little bit and see if we can receive the values from the form. Okay. So okay, great. So looking here, the request, if you remember, the request has a URL and a method. Fortunately, in each of these views, we get an object called request that has data about the browser request, including the method. So in this particular case, because we are using a post method, we are going to use request.post with capital POST. On this post object, we are going to have, so this post object is a dictionary. And so we're going to be able to use these names here to get these values here. Actually, let's see if we can bring up our application already, and that will let us actually see what we're looking at. Let me just start the server. Oh, yeah, it's not started anymore. Good. That's not what I was expecting. Okay. Okay, so now if we go to one of the driver detail pages, okay, we get an error. So that's okay. Let's see where this error happens. Okay. Race is not a registered namespace. So it seems to happen on this line where we're specifying the URL for the form. Okay, let's figure out why that could be happening. Okay, so this is in driver, which is under templates race. I'm using the same syntax. I've got the double quotes, okay. Let's vote. Okay, so let's see if Google can tell us something. And so what we want to Google here is probably something along the lines of Django form template URL. Oh, and then we want to attach the error, which is not a registered namespace. Yeah. It looks like somebody ran into this from the tutorial. I think I know what's happening. It might be an issue with the documentation being a bit outdated. Okay, and so it looks like we have to add this line. Hopefully this will work. So because we're using Python 2.7, it doesn't have all the features from Python 3, and therefore one of them we can import using this statement. At least that's what that Stack Overflow post seemed to suggest. Okay, well, we are getting a different error. I suppose that's better. It's not a registered template array. Okay. This does not feel like the error we're getting. Yeah, it is. Must be one of these. What is the version of Django we're using? Let's see. I forget how to check the version. Just a second. Django version. There we go. Python 3. Well, just regular Python. 111. Ah, okay. Okay, so that makes sense. Kind of. We're having a versioning problem. I'm surprised that this is happening. Let's see if we can figure out a way to fix this. Okay. I am not sure how to resolve this. I apologize. I will look into this and try to figure out a solution. Meanwhile, I think it would be interesting to see if you guys do this homework, meaning tutorial page 4, to see if this works in the polls application. So the problem that seems to be happening is the version of Django that we're using seems to be using an old version of a library that, well, that doesn't support what we're trying to do. So it's just like a weird alignment of versions that doesn't work the way it should. So I'll have a look at what could be done to fix this in the race project. But meantime, while you do the homework, it would be interesting to see if this works in the polls application. So do let me know how that goes. Any question? And again, I apologize. This is a good stopping point. And we can communicate over Discord about any questions related to this. But before we wrap up, any questions that we can talk about now? Okay. In that case, I hope you guys have a lovely afternoon. Thanks for bearing with me, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.